Welcome to Sparrow Falls, a refuge from the storms of life.
My guests today are the founders of a very precious organization called While We're Waiting. Brad and Jill Sullivan lost their 16-year-old daughter Hannah to cancer, and out of their grief with another grieving couple, they formed this ministry for bereaved parents in 2010.
If you'd like to stay up on what's happening at Sparrow Falls, subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media. You can find out more about that on our website at sparrowfalls.org. Today we have a guest, and here's Todd to introduce them.
I know what it is to lose a father, and I know what it is to have a doctor tell you during a prenatal ultrasound that your baby's heart has stopped beating. Those are very earth-shattering losses, but nothing compares to the loss I experienced when I lost my 18-year-old son. While We're Waiting is a biblically based ministry that organizes retreats to bring together 10 grieving parents for a weekend to mourn the loss of their child and find help and encouragement from each other. All meals are provided for, and the retreats are held in comfortable facilities across the U.S. And there's no cost to attend. It's all free. All you have to do is sign up and show up. My wife and I attended one of these last year in Tennessee, and it was a much-needed time with others. And we came away with new friends from that retreat, some of whom we continue to stay in contact with. That's the ministry of While We're Waiting. If you'd like more information about While We're Waiting, you can find them on the web at whilewe'rewaiting.org. This is the first part of a 3-part podcast with Brad and Jill. In this episode, Brad and Jill share with us the story of their daughter Hannah and how they grieved after she left this earth and entered the presence of her Lord. This is episode 5. Brad and Jill, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast.
Well, it's good to be here, and we're honored to visit with you today and to share our story and talk about the hope we have and just to be able to an opportunity to share our story. We always look forward to that. So it's good to be here.
Jill, well, I've gotten to know you a little bit over the past few years, and
Right.
you seem to be the face, but there's a lot of people behind what goes on at While We're Waiting. So it's good to have Brad on to see all the folks who are involved.
He's a big part of it, that's
Yes.
for sure.
Yeah. So you guys have, a difficult story of child loss, and why don't you walk us through a little bit of what you guys experienced and what you're comfortable sharing?
Sure. Well, we're, Jill and I met in college, and we got married toward the end of college and went to graduate school together. And we started our family soon after. And I'm an educator, and I started teaching and coaching, and Jill's a speech path. And so we started that charmed life of our, as in our family we had 2 daughters, and just loved life, loved family, and our girls, Bethany and Hannah. Hannah is our oldest, and then Bethany is 3.5 years younger, and they loved the adventure. As a school administrator, I've seemed to move every 2 or 3 years, and they loved that adventure of going to a new school and seeing a new environment, and we had. I had worked my way up into I was a high school principal, and I was both of my girls' high school principal, and it was neat to be their principals, and I got to go to their activities because that was part of my job, and I loved it. And
Wow.
Hannah, and I'm just talk specifically about Hannah, and she was incredible student. She was straight A student. Her plans were to be valedictorian of her high school, and she was number 1 in her class. And she loved being a part of all school activities. She wasn't athletic, but she liked athletics. And she was a manager on the basketball team, and she liked to go in the outdoors, camping or hunting and fishing with me. And we just loved our time together. And her sophomore year in high school, she woke up one morning and was sick to her stomach, and we put her back to bed. It was Valentine's Day, I remember. And that afternoon she felt better, and next morning she woke up same symptoms, sick to her stomach, and we found ourselves in our pediatrician real soon. And as we also noticed that her eyes were dilated, and they referred us to an ophthalmologist. And something that I like to talk about is how God was bringing people into our life. And if we had all day, I could share many incidents where we look back and we said, God knew that I needed to meet this person or be around this person. And as I look back at that, we got referred to an ophthalmologist who I went to college with, and he was who we got referred to. The last I knew that he was going to be a music minister. And I stood in his wedding. He sang in our wedding. We hadn't heard from him in 15 years, and we get referred to him. And little did we know he had become an ophthalmologist. And he was the one that walked with us with Hannah's diagnosis and was right there beside us throughout. And I just say that to say how God was providing people and in our lives that we look back and just say that was a blessing. But Tommy was there as we found out that Hannah had a brain tumor between her ears. Was there the day of diagnosis. He was there throughout the year of treatment, and he walked beside us, and we look back and just say, thank you, Lord, for that. And so it was that day that we found out was a difficult day. And Jill, you may want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's something you never expect to hear, that your child has a brain tumor. And, just the shock of that, it was just so difficult to process. And everything moved very rapidly. As soon as they found the brain tumor, and Tommy, our ophthalmologist friend, was the one who discovered that with the MRI. They had us at Children's Hospital the very next morning, ready for, whatever was to come. And when we got there, they started doing some tests with her. They gave her steroids to try to reduce the swelling that was on the brain because of the tumor. And we were in surgery just a few days later. And, it's a terrifying thing to send your child in for brain surgery, not knowing, how they're going to come out. And, Brad mentioned I'm a speech pathologist, and I'm thinking, okay, well, if she needs speech therapy, I can help her with that. We've got physical therapy. We've got all these things. We'll get her back. Never even really occurred to us that it could be cancer. I think we just kind of shut that possibility out of our minds. But she did very well with her surgery. She came through the surgery with flying colors, as they say. She really had no issues. They were able to go in and get that tumor without causing any damage to any of the surrounding tissue. And they came out and they said, best possible outcome. We were able to get it all, but of course we're going to send it off for a biopsy. And depending on what the biopsy shows, that will determine, the next steps. And so we actually were released from the hospital just a few days later after brain surgery. Came home, and she was starting the process of recovery. But of course, we had to return to the hospital to get the results of the biopsy. And I remember walking into that room, and there was our surgeon was there. We recognized him, and there was another doctor there. And then there were all these other people there. And we realized later that those were counselors, because they weren't sure how we were going to respond to the news that we were about to get. The doctor told us that the biopsy had come back, and it was a grade 4 glioblastoma tumor. And I'm the kind of person, I'm immediately thinking, okay, how do you spell that? Because as soon as I get home, I'm going to Google this, and I'm going to find out what we need to do. And it was almost as if he could read my mind, because he said, now don't go home and Google glioblastoma, because you won't like what you hear. It is a terminal diagnosis, but it typically, presents itself in older adults, and she's only 16. And she's healthy otherwise. So we're going to do radiation and chemotherapy and all of these things. And, we think we've got a chance to beat this. And so that launched us on a year-long journey of radiation and chemotherapy. And she did very well for about 6 months or so. She would like Brad said, she wanted to be the valedictorian of her class. So she didn't want to miss school and she wanted to keep her grades up. So she would go to school every day. And I would pick her up in the afternoon, about 7th period, and I would drive her to Little Rock, which is about an hour drive. And she would get her radiation to her brain. And then we would come home and she would do her homework. And then right before bed, she would swallow a handful of chemo pills because she was on an oral chemotherapy at that time. And, I would always think how heroic it was that she could swallow those pills knowing that she was going to be sick in the morning, from having taken them. But she did it every day without complaining. And for 6 months, we would go in every 2 months to have an MRI. And every time they would tell us it's all clear, everything looks great. And we were on this course of chemo. They said, we would do 12 months of chemo and then we'd reassess, from there. And in our minds, okay, it was 12 months of chemo and then she would be cured.
Yeah.
And, we were about 6 months, maybe 8 months into it. And she had been doing well, but all of a sudden we began seeing some of those same symptoms that we saw at the beginning, the nausea, the headaches, and some balance issues this time. And so we called up to Children's and said, it had only been 6 weeks since her last MRI, which had been clear. And we said, something's going on. And we knew there was a stomach bug going around at school. Maybe it's that, but we really think she needs to be looked at. And so they said, sure, bring her up and we'll scan her. And so we did. And that was a long evening. We found out the next morning that the results of the scan showed that the cancer was back. And this time it was on her brain stem and it was up and down her spine. There were so many tumors on her spine. They called them snowdrift tumors. And you could see it in the MRI. And they called us in and we sat down with that doctor and, Hannah was there and Bethany was there. It was the 4 of us. And he told us that at that point, Hannah had less than a 5% chance of survival, but we were going to try another kind of chemotherapy, an IV chemotherapy, and another type of radiation that went from the top of her head to her tailbone all around her body, a very strong radiation. And, we walked out of there and we were stunned again, but, we knew that our God was not a God of percentages. We knew that, 5%, that's nothing in God's economy.
Right.
And so, we prayed the whole year. We continually prayed for Hannah to be healed. Our desire, of course, was for her to be healed here on earth. We started that chemotherapy and radiation treatment and we got through the radiation. It was tough. And she really never recovered from that point. She did go back to school for a few days in December because she was just that determined, but she just, the cancer was in her brain. And so she began to lose some of her function and some of her skills and things like that. And she ultimately went to heaven. She was healed on February 26th of 2009. And she was quite a girl.
Yes.
And we were proud of her, the way she walked that journey.
And she, as I look back at what God taught us that year, and what we're applying now in our lives, we learned a lot. And in a story I'd like to share, with a couple of stories. One is the day we found out she had a tumor. Our neighbor, who was an older couple that were a retired pastor, I called him first thing. I said, Brother Gerald, could you come down? And he was right there and he prayed with us and he gave us a verse, Nahum 1:7. The Lord is good, a refuge in times of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. Yeah. And I remember hearing those words and hearing that scripture and we prayed together, and we prayed together as a family and said, God, we trust you. And at that point, in the middle of this news of our daughter having cancer, we had peace. And I've always heard about the peace that passes all understanding, Philippians 4:7.
Yeah.
we experienced that peace. Now, were we broken? Were we devastated with that news? Yes, but we felt peace. And the other story I like to talk about too is we're in Children's Hospital, and Jill has gone home to get some rest. And I'm staying with her, and we're trying to go to sleep that night. And we're a couple of days out of surgery. And she said, "Dad, I've got to tell you something." I said, "Okay." And she said, "Dad, back in our youth group, we had this weekend retreat where the youth gathered and they had activities, but he said in teaching and worship. And he said, she's told me, she said, Dad, the leader shared with us how God allows storms in your life to bring you closer to him, and also to allow others to see him through your storm." And she went on to tell me, "Dad, our lives have been calm waters. We hadn't had any storms. And I want you and Mom to know that I prayed for a storm that God might use me."
Wow.
And that was a comfort, because God was preparing her and had been preparing her for that moment. And she accepted the news of a grade 4 glioblastoma.
Wow.
with grace and without fear. And throughout that year, when we would get those scans that were not good news, I was emotional. Jill was emotional, and she would look at us and she'd tell us, "Mom and Dad, I'm okay. I'm good." And she was, because God had her. And so that's what I've learned, and I continue to learn. And then as we dealt with that year of praying for healing and knowing God could heal, and we really got this come to terms with the sovereignty of God, and understanding that, and understanding he knows our days, and he knew, Psalms 139, he created us in our mother's womb. He knew every day before one day come to be.
That's right.
And did we believe that? And we did, and we come to terms with that. And so we walked beside her, and she encouraged us in this journey, and she's an encouragement today as we saw her health deteriorate, and we saw her go to heaven, and our perspective now is different on everything.
Yeah.
And we have an eternal perspective that I should have had as a follower of Christ all my life. But this changed it for me, and that's been my perspective. And that's, I can rest in that too. Rest in the sovereignty of God, and rest in knowing that God is in control, and I can trust him. Back to Nahum 1:7. And but he has taught us an awful lot, and we have learned a lot from other people.
Yes.
What I find so amazing in that story is how God prepared you through your daughter. To me, that is stunning. And such a mercy for you to have that, to where she was sort of your strength.
Yeah,
she was. And it's funny, because that wasn't her nature before that. She was one of these kids who worried about everything. We've mentioned a couple of times how she wanted to be the valedictorian. If she got a 98 on a test instead of 100, she would freak out. If there was a thunderstorm watch, she would just think there was a tornado coming. She was that kind of kid until she was diagnosed with cancer. And then it was like, it nothing seemed to faze her from that point. But I've knowing this, what she walked through, and having met lots of parents who have lost children to cancer in particular, I really believe God gives those kids a special grace. That they're able to walk through things that we as adults we couldn't even comprehend, and they walk through it with grace and courage. And she was one of those kids. I've heard of lots of them through the ministry that we do. And yeah, it's a blessing and an honor, really, to be around kids like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to that eternal perspective, because, after my son died, that was what hit me, was that there's an eternal gravity that I did not have beforehand. And now that I had a child in heaven, that gravity just became ever present.
Yes. We sure experienced that. And we still, that's our perspective, and,
and I look back at my life and I wonder why didn't I have this beforehand?
Me too.
Right.
Yeah. So with that, as you walked through those days after, tell me a little bit of how that went. Were you able to, obviously it's devastating. It doesn't matter how spiritual or strong you are. Those are devastating days that are very hard to get through. Did you have support from family or church as you went through those?
We did. We had good family support. We have a fairly large family that all live mostly in Arkansas. And so, they were there for us really the whole year. And our church family was very supportive as well. Something this may sound unusual, but our stories are different. I know, with Tristan, you had no idea how your life was about to change. With Hannah, we had the blessing. I'm not sure if it's a blessing, but we had the awareness ahead of time that unless God intervened and did a miracle, she was going to go to heaven. And so one of the things that I did while she was still with us was I wrote her obituary. Sitting there in the living room with her sleeping in the recliner next to me. I gathered pictures for the funeral service and all of that. Because I knew that afterwards, I can't imagine going through like what you guys did and having to plan a funeral just when you're the least prepared to make those kinds of decisions. And so I did all of that ahead of time. And even as I sat there, I thought, well, if God does do a miracle and heals her, this will be part of her testimony.
Yeah.
Hey, we had your whole funeral plan, and look, God healed you.
Wow.
And he did heal her by taking her to heaven. But, and I'm so glad that I was able to do that, because I have almost no memory at all of the visitation, the funeral, the days following. Even with the preparation that we had of knowing that she was leaving us, there's still a shock that hits you when it actually does happen. Because I think you always think, oh, this couldn't possibly happen. And so, those immediate days were a fog.
Yeah. And even when it does, I don't know how you could prepare yourself for what's about to happen. Even if you know it's going to happen, you just do not know how much the world turns upside down and everything falls apart.
Yes.
Whether you're prepared for it or not, it's so devastating, and it's insignificant about how well you were prepared, I guess, beforehand.
Right.
Well, and just the reality, daily reality, when you walk in, and for us with our kids being at home, and there's that empty bedroom, there's that empty place at the table, just that reality daily, it's just, it was crushing for a long time. And, I think something that was a blessing to us is that we found out pretty quick that we got comfort from being around people that understood us.
Yes.
Some of our best friends didn't understand us anymore.
Yes.
But we had friends that had lost children, and we met people that have lost children, and we connected with them.
Yes.
Quickly. And that's who we were drawn to.
Yeah.
I have two families that I worked with in education that lost kids, and I was very close to both families and worked closely with them and went to church with them. And we just looked at as at a distance and saw them walk through the journey they were on. One was a sudden illness, and the other one was a cancer, died by cancer. But we were drawn to them. That's the first people I wanted to talk to, and we did, and just sit down and have long conversations. And then I look back at that and know that it wasn't a coincidence. Again, as I said earlier, that those people were in our lives, and God had placed them there. We got to watch them. And I remember one of the couples, when their little Rachel went to heaven, I said, Mark and Jeannie, how are you doing this? And they looked at me, and I was devastated because, I've been around that, the pregnancy was around them and at work and it's in church, and I was praying for healing. It was a short illness, but went to heaven pretty quick. And it says, it's just God. You can do it with God. And I remembered that when our Hannah went to heaven, and I look back at that and I say, thank you, Lord, for friends Mark and Jeannie Smith, and how grateful I was that they were in our life. And then we found other people that we were drawn to, and that was who we spent time with.
I think you mentioned, we've been talking about how we have that eternal perspective that we suddenly get after our child goes to heaven. And you realize real quick that the other people around you don't have that.
No, they don't.
And the small talk and just the conversation about sports and the weather and, politics and whatever, after you've lost a child, you don't want to talk about that stuff anymore. You want to talk about things of eternal significance. And I think that's why so many bereaved parents kind of lose friends sometimes, and maybe their entire friend group sometimes changes, because we really find ourselves drawn to others that have that same eternal perspective.
Yes, that is so true. We noticed that right away too. So this was in 2009. So you guys are over 10 years out from this. How long did it take you to get into Hannah's room and start taking stuff out?
That's a good question. Quite a while, actually. The way our house was set up, her bedroom was at the end of the hallway. Our bedroom was more towards the front of the hallway. Bethany's bedroom was across the hall from ours, and her bedroom was down at the end of the hallway. So we didn't even have to walk past our bedroom door. Really, the only thing else that was back there was her room and then a guest room. Now, Brad, I think, got some comfort from going into her room and just being in there. I did not. It wasn't helpful for me to be there. So that was something, we just gave each other grace with. But for me, we just kind of closed that door, and that room sat very silent and closed and dark for
several months,
probably a year and a half.
Yeah,
actually. And then what was kind of the catalyst for us to do something with it was our daughter, Bethany. It was getting to be around the time of her birthday, and she had, any mom will know what I'm talking about when I say the little girl furniture, the white little girl furniture, the twin bed and the white dresser and all of that. And Hannah had a queen size bed and, a bigger dresser and that kind of thing. And she kind of wanted that furniture for her room. And so for her birthday, we thought, well, we'll, get rid of her little girl furniture and replace it with the big girl furniture that Hannah had. And so that was the catalyst to actually get us to go in there and do something. And, again, it had probably been a year and a half, maybe even longer. It was okay at that point to go in there because I had a purpose,
Right.
And I went through all of I had to empty her dresser drawers and things like that so that Bethany could have her things. And so we ended up moving all of the furniture in there, but we left the things she had on the walls up, the posters and her corkboard thing that she had all of her, high school stuff pinned up on and things like that. So when you walked in, it still kind of looked like her room. So I think that kind of eased the transition. And then we turned her room into an office. And that, I put a desk in there looking out the window, pulled up the blinds, let in the light, kept the door open from that point on. And that room became, it transformed at that point. Just kind of a special thing that we did. Hannah's middle name was Joy. And she kind of personified joy in her life, and she loved her middle name. And so I started collecting joy items, things that said joy. And I filled that room up with things that said joy. And I remember even writing blog posts about how when I went in that room, I didn't always feel joy because it was heavy for a while. But over time, God redeemed that space and made something beautiful out of it. And that's actually the space that While We're Waiting ministry was pretty much born in, because that became my office. And, but, we have parents that come to retreats, and we talk about, how do we handle our children's things? That's one of the things we talk about during topic time sometimes. And I think there's no timetable for that. It's when you feel it's right, unless you have to, like you're moving or something like that. I don't think there's any time frame that it needs to be done, or that's the right time or the wrong time. You yourself are the only one that know when that time is.
If you've lost a child, I highly recommend you attend a While We're Waiting retreat. You can find their webpage at whilewe'rewaiting.org. They also have an active Facebook group that you can join now, and a Facebook group for those who are alumni from a retreat. And there's also a special While We're Waiting group for parents who have lost children to suicide.
Sparrow Falls is the ministry of Todd Schaefer. You can find our website at sparrowfalls.org. That's sparrowfalls.org. We hope to see you again, and though you walk in the midst of trouble, may God in His Word revive you and renew your hope. We look forward to seeing you again at Sparrow Falls.